Well, this VA scandal exploded about 4 weeks ago. Since that time, President Obama has spoken to the issue just twice. Once when our own Ed Henry specifically asked him about it a few weeks ago. The second time at that big news conference a few days back. Now, he's promising action. We return now to our panel. So I want to ask you about the president's presser this week and your reaction to it. Kat Gates-Skipper, you're a U.S. Marine vet. You're married to a U.S. vet as well. Your thoughts on President Obama's comments this week?
I thought that was just a lot of talk because we heard the same thing about 5 or 6 years ago. Nothing has changed.
You don't believe, even in the wake of the deaths now that we've seen and the political firestorm, that he's going to do more this time?
No, ma'am, not at all.
Really? Why not?
Because nothing's changed. Everything he says is just not true. I mean, we've had more deaths. We've had more people that are waiting for care. We've had more of everything. I mean, nothing has changed. The numbers are increasing. Nothing has decreased. Just alone, my husband, just a couple of months ago, went to the VA to get some cancer removed from his arm, a little surgery, because he has skin cancer from Agent Orange. His blood pressure was high. He went to the Tampa VA hospital. They sent him to the emergency room. We were in there for 6.5 hours. Nobody bothered to check his blood pressure. When the doctor come in, he just asked him, he said, well, are you feeling better now? I mean, didn't check his blood pressure or nothing. Gave him medication and sent us home.
Not exactly Cadillac care.
Not at all.
Bernard, your thoughts on President Obama, because this scandal has been around. It's been around for years now. It just seems like the tipping point has been what we learned about Phoenix, and that documentation exists now that vets are actually dying.
You know, unfortunately, I do hope it's a watershed moment. This has been a horrendous bipartisan failure, and I've had the opportunity in the last few years to talk to almost 2,000 vets, many of them combat vets just back from Iraq and Afghanistan, and they're united in a few things. Number one, the VA is extraordinarily important, and number two, they are not getting the care that they deserve or expect. And here's the real problem. The problem is, I would hope we would never send our men and women into combat without proper equipment and proper planning. But that's exactly what we're doing to the almost 2.5 million vets who are coming home from Iraq and Afghanistan. We don't have the systems in place. We don't have the care in place. We don't have the funding in place. And we've known about this for a decade. So it is bipartisan failure on both sides.
Lucas, you voted for President Obama.
I did.
How do you think he's handling it?
I don't know. It's hard to judge someone from a seat of power that you're not in. But with that being said, I think he has done a lot to help veterans. Veteran employment is definitely something that's improved since he's been in office. But I do think that accountability needs to be placed on the right people, and it's up to him to make sure that that happens.
How about the issue of accountability? Because we had Ralph Peters on earlier saying he defends General Shinseki. He doesn't think he should go. Amber, what do you think?
Well, I have to say, when President Obama had his press conferences a few days ago, I honestly thought that I was going to finally see some presidential leadership and that he was going to say he had accepted Secretary Shinseki's resignation. And instead, I was at the Senate hearing where Shinseki testified, and they may have been reading from the exact same speech because they said the same thing. They're both hiding behind the Inspector General's investigation that isn't due out until August.
Which only speaks to the latest episode in this whole scandal.
Exactly. The IG puts out hundreds of reports every year, and just as we saw in Shinseki's testimony, they're not making it all the way up to the top, or he's not caring to read it because no changes are being made from those reports.
How many of you think General Shinseki, Secretary Shinseki, should resign or be forced to resign? Wow.
Potentially.
Wow.
I think we need the facts to come out.
Definitely.
Go ahead.
I mean, definitely. If you were ever at the VA, you'd understand that next to God is the VA secretary. What that guy does and what he shows, and he hasn't shown anything. He hasn't been communicating. He has been talking to the employees. He has been talking to the veterans. He has become part of the problem.
Help us understand, as somebody who worked with the prior administration on veterans issues, how does it happen that we get specific reports saying that the delays are ridiculous, months and months and long, and there's active fraud in covering them up? And here we are 6 years after those reports are generated, and nothing's changed. President Bush did not address this, and President Obama has not. How does that happen?
The presidents rely on the secretary. The secretary gets briefed every week on all this stuff. And he then either does something about it or he leads it to his deputy secretary.
Do you think Shinseki didn't know that this was happening?
No, he had to have known. But he probably left it, I'm guessing, he probably left it to his deputy secretary to handle it. He's also part of the problem. He's brought up a new, Obama's nominated a new VHA replacement undersecretary who's also been part of the problem, Dr. Mikowski. And he needs to go as well because he's tainted. He was one of those VISN directors, regional office directors.
I just have to ask this one last question. Do you believe, because most of the men and women who work at the VA have dedicated their lives to helping veterans, they actually do care about veterans' care. Do you believe that these people at these select facilities were actively committing fraud, knowing that it could lead to the deaths of veterans? Go ahead.
Well, absolutely they were. It was around their bonuses and keeping their jobs and making themselves look good. And so instead of actually fixing the problem, they put more effort into hiding the problem, and so that they look good.
Well, I have a slightly different perspective.
Gotta go quickly.
I think they are self-serving, but I don't think they thought it would actually kill people. They're too incompetent to be that devious.
Panel, thank you all for your service, and thank you for being here. Well, just ahead, these heartbreaking stories are raising new questions about big government programs. We'll take a look into that when we come back.
As a result, in those kinds of publicly run systems, you get tremendous inefficiency, no penalties for it, and then you get the falsification.